let's kind of transition and kind of see the way that God deals with his people when they're going through maybe moments of anxiety and stress, right? So in the darkest moments of Israel's history, what did God want the Israelites to think about? Okay, that's what we're going to transition on to. And just maybe as a cap to the discussion we just had, if you've been in Bible class with me at all in the last 8 years, then you know when we talk about this idea of significance and insignificance, right? There's basically kind of two options. One is there's this worldly atheistic option where nothing matters and there's no potential, there's no purpose to things. The biblical answer is the exact opposite, right? The biblical answer is that literally everything matters. Everything matters and everything has a purpose. And the Christian message, God's message, and the message that we can support with the testimony of Scripture is that God is literally working through everything in your life for your good. That means not only the good choices you make, but the bad choices you make, that the hardships that you face, somehow there is a good God that is working through it all for your good. And the Scripture is the testimony of getting to look back and see how God works through nothing but mistakes for the eternal good, right, of his children. And so we're going to get a glimpse of that here. But yeah, the Christian response is that there is an overarching story to everything. And that's what we've been working our way through, this meta-narrative to salvation, or this meta-narrative of salvation over all of history that God is working through, right? For not just the good of the whole world, but each and every one of us, right? That call God our Father. So with that, let's see how God talks to the Israelites as they're going through the darkest moments of their history. So last time we ended with Babylon coming down, sacking Jerusalem, finally taking the Israelites in Judea up into captivity, right? So they were in this time of captivity there. In the exile, when all of these Israelites are now in exile in Babylon, separated from their homeland. This is a painting of you see a person praying down there in the right-hand corner, and there's a bunch of kind of wise-looking royal people in the upper left looking down at him and talking to a king and kind of gesturing at that person praying. Can anyone guess what that is? That's Daniel praying, right? And the satraps pointing out his biblical faith and trying to get him killed for it, right? So that's the setting that we've got. We've got now all these Israelites that are in exile, and as they are foreigners in this foreign land, people are trying to destroy their faith, right? And if you do not change your faith, then they are trying to have you killed, right? That is the environment for a lot of the figures that we find in our accounts of the exile there. So how does God respond now to these Israelites in exile? And just think about this for a moment. So from the time of God giving the Israelites on Mount Sinai their law in 1400 all the way up till about 500, up until about 600 BC there, you have this time period close to 1,000 years where God is constantly going back to the Israelites over and over again. And he's constantly saying, if you continue to serve other gods, if you turn away from me, you're going to suffer because of this. The nations are going to come and they're going to oppress you. And this has been going on for 1,000 years, where God has been sending prophets over and over and over again, reminding them, come back to me, come back to me, come back to me, come back to me, come back to me. And finally, the Babylonians come down. They end the southern kingdom, take them into exile. If you were in exile, how would you feel about your relationship with God? He tried for 1,000 years with me and my ancestors. He's had it. He's done, right? He wants nothing more to do with me. He is through with taking care of my people at this point. And let's see how God then responds to the Israelites as they are in exile. So the word Messiah comes from the book of Daniel. And the word Messiah means anointed one. Can anyone tell me what the word anointed one is in Greek? Yeah, right. Christ, right? Christus. So the word that we have for Christ, that is just the Greek form of Mashiach, of the Hebrew word for Messiah. So Christ, Messiah means the exact same thing, anointed one. And the anointed one then was mentioned in the book of Daniel. And so in ancient times, it referred to priests, just the phrase, right? The anointed one. There were priests and kings who God commanded ought to be anointed with oil for special purposes. So maybe think of Samuel going and visiting the house of Jesse and finding the young David and anointing him with oil as king. And so this idea of anointing someone with oil was God's special way of marking a person. And so God promises he's sending an anointed one, right? A special anointed one. And so in the 530s BC, God spoke through the prophet Daniel about the promised king. So about that king that we were talking about that was promised to David and onward, and he began calling that king the anointed one. So we find that in Daniel 9:25. And so this promised king who would restore Israel began to be called the Messiah. So that's why we call him the Messiah. That term associated with this coming king begins in this kind of exile period. Okay? So now we've got the promise that there's going to be this king that's going to come. So even before they got into exile, what were things like? This is a picture of, I think that's, which king is that? It's King Ahaz, and that's him sacrificing his son to Moloch. So that's what this picture is. King Ahaz was one of the kings of Judah, so one of the ancestors of David. And at this time period, we have the prophet Micah that's going to be speaking. So Micah was a prophet during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, a time of spiritual turmoil ranging from the despicable practices of Ahaz, which we've got here pictured, to Hezekiah's troubles with Assyria. So an incredibly tumultuous time for Israel. The kings are running after other gods. And if they're not running after other gods, they're defending Judah from huge empires that are coming down to attack them. And so we know very little about this prophet Micah. We know he's a contemporary of Isaiah. He writes somewhere around 750 to 686 during the reigns of these kings. And his prophecies, they're full of warnings concerning the fall of Samaria. So the kingdom of Israel and its capital Samaria, and warnings about the fall of Judah. And the book of Micah, this collection of prophecies, it alternates between kind of doom and hope and back and forth. And in the midst of it, we have this prophecy that God just kind of drops in there. So he says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." So just maybe take a little bit of a look here. This is in the context of which prophecy? So we talked about God promising Israel a priestly sacrifice, that's suffering service, a prophet, and a king. Which one does this apply to? Is God here talking about a coming prophet? Is he talking about a priest, or is he talking about a sacrifice, someone suffering, or is he talking about a king? Take a look at it. Which one is it?
Sounds like a king.
Why does it sound like a king to you?
Ruler over Israel.
Yeah, right. So he's talking about a ruler, right? So out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel. So this is in that collection of prophecies dealing with that promised king that's going to come. And so if you remember when the wise men showed up and they said, "We're here to worship the king," and they were talking to Herod, and they said, "So where are we going to find this king?" What did the wise men of Herod, or the scribes of Herod, where did they point him? Yeah, to Bethlehem, right? So they were expecting the Messiah, the king, to be coming from here. So in the 700s, 600s BC, during the time of Isaiah, what details did God give concerning this promised king? The big one here is that he's going to be coming from Bethlehem, okay? And this is interesting because Bethlehem, even though it's the birthplace of King David, it's an insignificant, inconsequential little town. All right, we're talking about a tiny little village, a few hundred people or something like that. And God is saying, out of this tiny little village, is going to be becoming a ruler. All right. What else? What other details do we have about this ruler that's going to be coming out of Bethlehem?
It's Marion.
Yep,
His
Marion.
origins are of old, from ancient times. He's been
Yeah.
around forever.
Yeah. So think about that, right? Somehow this king is going to come out of Bethlehem, but his origins are from of old, from ancient times, right? So David was 3 centuries earlier than when this prophecy was given. So I guess that's kind of ancient, but even more ancient, we know, is going to be the one that's begotten from eternity, right? Maybe that origins from ancient time, that almost makes us think all the way back to Genesis, right? Into the promises that were given thousands of years earlier. All to say that God promises there's going to be this king that's going to come out of Bethlehem, and he is rooted in ancient history, like ancient history, okay, in some way, shape, or form. So kind of interesting, huh? So that was during the divided kingdom. Then they go into exile, and while they're in exile, after spending some time there, there's going to be 3 groups that return slowly into Jerusalem, that are allowed by the rulers to come back at that time. And so there's going to be 3 different movements that take place. The first is going to be a group that comes with Zerubbabel, who's going to help build the temple. Then there's going to be Nehemiah that's going to come, or there's going to be Ezra that comes and is going to help the Israelites reestablish themselves, and then Nehemiah after that. So those are kind of our 3 big leaders during this return period that bring the Israelites back. You've got Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. And maybe you've heard of Ezra and Nehemiah before, because there's books of the Bible named after them. But Zerubbabel, pretty cool, amazing figure in the Old Testament. And at some point, someone needs to name a son after Zerubbabel. That's kind of a nice, right, good name, I think. So that takes place during the return. So that was Ezra. Then you also have here you got Cyrus decreeing, allowing the Israelites to return. So King Cyrus makes a decree where he allows the Israelites to return. That's pictured here. And then ultimately you're going to have afterwards, the last group that returns is Nehemiah, and he's going to come to help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And so what you see here is Nehemiah going and inspecting the walls at nighttime. And the reason he's going and inspecting the walls at nighttime is because Israel, even though they've been allowed by the empire to return, there's still a lot of city-states that are around Israel that don't want Israel to rebuild. And so they've been harassing and attacking the Israelites. And so he's going at night so that the enemies of Israel surrounding them don't know that he's back and planning, or that he's come to kind of rebuild the walls there. So another kind of odd, strange time for Israel as they're trying to figure out how to reestablish their country at this point. So in the midst then of these returns, we've got a few prophets that God sends. One of them is the prophet Zechariah. So Zechariah was born in Babylon as an exile, and he returned with Zerubbabel. And Zechariah was one of the leading priests at that time. And in 520, Zechariah begins to receive this prophecy that we have recorded in the book of Zechariah. And the purpose of this letter is, on the one hand, to encourage the Israelites to continue to rebuild their wall, but it's also now, after all this craziness that's taken place, to give them a bit of kind of spiritual renewal and a little bit of hope for the future, and to get them back into worshiping God. And so in it, we've got these 2 interesting prophecies to point out, and maybe you'll recognize some of these or how they're going to be fulfilled. So in Zechariah 9:9, Zechariah, God speaks through him and says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So this is kind of interesting. What do you think's going on with the idea of a king? So again, if we're kind of thinking about those those main groups of promises that God gives. Here we've got the king that's being promised again. And at this point, the king has already been identified as someone that's going to be called the Messiah, right? The Mashiach. And this king, how is he going to arrive? On a donkey. What do you think that's all about? Any guesses?
Comes not in power, but in humility.
Okay, Jesus comes in humility. So you would pair the idea of gentleness and riding on a donkey together. Okay. Other thoughts? So he's coming in humility.
This is Evelyn.
Yep, Evelyn?
Wasn't a donkey used for work?
Yes.
So
Donkeys
in some
were used
ways,
for work.
right. So it wouldn't be a king who worked. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah. Maybe the way we can kind of think about this and expand on what Evelyn said and what Judy has said as well. What would you expect a king to ride in on? A chariot, right? Or a, yeah, right, a big war, yeah, a war horse of some sort, right? So horses at this time, they were only used for military purposes, right? They weren't used for other things. And so you expect, the knight in shining armor to be riding in on a big stately horse or being drawn by a chariot or something like that. Instead, we have him showing up on a donkey, right? And a donkey is not a military type of creature. It is a different type of creature. So maybe this is stressing the idea that the king is not coming as a warlord, right? Is not coming with war in mind or military stuff, but instead this is a very different kind of king that's coming. And what does kind of help us in kind of thinking about this is that word gentle that's used there. And gentle maybe isn't the best, the only way we can translate that Hebrew word. The other word that it gets translated as is humble, right? So instead of maybe thinking of a meek and mild king, think about a humble king. What does the word humble tell you about this king? Yeah.
Well, I think this is going back to Moses, who was the humblest man that ever lived.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So somehow one of the chief virtues of God's leaders has been their humility in some way, shape, or form. So you think of Moses' humility, you think of also maybe David's humility as well, that he had not overthrowing Saul, right, but staying close to God's word and his will. And the times that David screwed up were the times that he departed, right, from his humility. Either way, what we have is the word humility. What does that mean to be humble? What does that mean? It means to place yourself lower, right? It means to be in a kind of servant role in some sort, right? To be humble is to think lesser about yourself and higher about the people around you. And so we've got a king that is somehow humble, right? And is not coming in as this kind of great military leader of some sort. So very interesting promise, right? That's given at this point to God's people as they're trying to rebuild their city here, right? We got another interesting, there's a neat quote by Luther, just in regards to this idea of the king coming as humble. Luther says, "Here there is no violence, no armor, no power, no anger, no wrath. Here there are only kindness, justice, salvation, mercy, and every good thing," right? So just think of the picture of this kind of king that's coming in. Not like the types of kings they were more exposed to in their divided kingdom, as well as when they were in exile in Babylon. Another prophecy a little bit later in Zechariah. Zechariah says these words, "And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn child." So just kind of take that in and unpack what's being said here, okay? "I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication." But then look at these pronouns. "They will look on me." See the first person pronoun, right? they will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one. So back then to the third person, on him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn child, or for a firstborn son. What's going on here?
I think God's talking about the second person of the Trinity.
The second, you think God's talking about the second person of the Trinity, huh? Yeah. So even before kind of bringing in our very concrete understanding of the three persons and things like that, imagine you were just an Israelite reading this. What's the Israelite to make of these words? When you got the me and the him, what's going on? Somehow the me is the him. You see that? Right? They will look on me, the one they have pierced. So this is God speaking, and God is saying, they will pierce me. Who? The house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, right? So the Israelites are going to pierce me, and they will look for him, or they will mourn for him as one who mourns for an only child. So very strange thing going on here. Somehow God is going to be pierced and Israel is going to mourn for him, right? For him. And so some weird stuff going on here. And the Israelites were aware of this weird stuff going on in the language. Supplication, that's pleas for mercy, right? So we're going to give the spirit of grace and a spirit of pleading for mercy, right? But they're going to look on me and the one they have pierced. So we see where this is going, but could you imagine being an Israelite trying to kind of piece together this strange prophecy as it's being put forward, right? They're taking all these other promises that God has given and they're trying to somehow fit these things together. So in the 500s, what details did God give concerning this promised king? He's going to ride in on a donkey when he comes into Jerusalem, right? When he comes to you anyways, he's going to be coming humble and riding on a donkey. Is that just metaphorical? I wonder, right? And then he is going to somehow be associated with God and be pierced, and people are going to mourn over his piercing, right? So yeah. Interesting stuff going on here. Then there's one kind of major other thought that we find right before this kind of big silence that takes place. And so if we go back to the prophet Isaiah, in the midst of Isaiah, there is this promise that God gives where he says, there's a voice of one calling in the desert. So he's not calling in the desert, but the voice is saying, in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord, right? So in the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed. So what does God seem to be saying about what will precede the coming of the Messiah? Yeah, Kathy. Yeah, right. He's going to be sending someone, right? He's going to be sending someone that's going to be calling, make a path, right? Make a path for this servant of God that's going to be coming, right? So we've got a promise that there's going to be this someone that's going to be a voice, right? That's going to be saying, make straight in the wilderness a highway for the Lord. And just think about that picture, right? So a desert or a wilderness, right? Think about completely inhospitable, completely, rugged land. What does it take to make a highway through, rugged land? Pull out the dynamite, right? Pull out all of the biggest tools that you've got, right? In order to pave a way. Back then, you couldn't pave a way through this type of terrain. And instead, now we've got him saying, we're going to make a way through all of this ugliness for the coming king, right? A voice, right? This person is going to come and make this way through it, right? And so then right before this silent period that we call the intertestamental period, we've got one more prophecy that we're going to be talking about here. You see it right there, that dot at the bottom from Malachi. And so just a glance then at Malachi. So Malachi records the last revelation that God would give his people before a 400-year silence. In some of these last words, let's see what God reminds his people. So after rebuilding the wall, Nehemiah is going to return to Persia. And when he comes back to Jerusalem, he's going to discover that the Jewish people had fallen into sins again. So this kind of up and downness of the Jewish people, it continues even after they come back out of exile from Babylon. And many of these sins, they line up with what Malachi is addressing here. And so many think that Malachi was a contemporary then of Nehemiah, wrote about 430, right before this silence, making him most likely the very last prophet that we have of God's before this silent period. And so this is what Malachi says. Or what God says through Malachi. See, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. Okay. So what's God promising? Again, he's promising some messenger, right? Someone that's going to be preparing the way, right? It sounds an awful lot like that Isaiah passage that we heard, a messenger who's going to prepare the way before me. And when this messenger arises, then the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. So this is an interesting phrase. The Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. Who's the Lord that they're seeking? Okay, the Messiah. But the Messiah is a king, right? It's the promised king of Israel that's been promised, right? There's going to be a person of David that's going to come. But where is he going to come? Is he going to go to his palace? He's going to go to the temple. So again, we've got this priestly and kingly stuff kind of overlapping again, right? And so the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. So all that stuff kind of bound together. And then finally, some of the very last words of Malachi, see, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. And so who else are the Israelites going to be waiting for? Now they're waiting for, right before the silence, they're waiting for Elijah to come back. And so this is going to be a theme that we find throughout parts of the gospel where they're saying, is this person Elijah? Was John the Baptist Elijah? Was Jesus the Elijah to come? And things like that. So that's going to be part of it as well. All right. So before we kind of wrap things up here, what is God telling his people in the midst of all of this horrible time in their history as they are in captivity, right? As they're coming out of captivity and still being harassed by enemies, and as they're rebuilding Jerusalem and they're continuing to still fall in and out of sin the entire time, what's God's message to them?
There is hope.
There's hope. What do you mean by that? That's very abstract, that word hope. What do you mean by that?
There's a Messiah coming.
Yeah, right. So all of the promises, the one-way promises that God had made before, he is still keeping them. Remember how I promised this king to you, right? When David was on the throne, that king will still come. I am not taking this promise away at all, right? He will still reestablish your kingdom. And the only way that you can justify this in your mind is that obviously the kingdom is not being established because you deserve the kingdom. You don't in any way, shape, or form. Your sins separate you from me. There's nothing that you can do to deserve this king, but yet I'm going to follow through and I'm going to establish this king. And he's going to come like a king that you've never seen before. He's going to come humble. He's going to come to the temple. He is going to reunite you with your God, right? You're going to pierce him, right? And it's just more and more of these details as they get put together before this moment of silence. So that kind of takes us to the very end here. What time do we got? 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, let's real quickly take a look at this intertestamental period so that we're ready to start at the beginning of the Gospels next time. I'll come back to this. This is a neat piece of art that I want to talk to you about at some point. So this intertestamental period, what's that a mosaic of? Or who's that a mosaic of? Yeah, it's Alexander the Great. And so at one point in this intertestamental period, the thing that's really going to kind of get the thing kickstarted is you're going to have Alexander swooping down and taking over Israel as part of this vast empire that he creates. And so Daniel, while he was in captivity, in exile, Daniel was one of these figures, a prophet of God, that did a lot of dream interpretation. And there was this dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel was one of his wise men. And so the king asked David, or asked Daniel eventually, can you interpret this dream? And this is the account of it real quickly. So this is Daniel telling King Nebuchadnezzar the dream that he had. Nebuchadnezzar does not tell him what his dream is. Daniel's going to both tell him his dream and interpret it, okay? So he says, you looked, O king, and there before you, you saw a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue is made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff in a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. All right, so you got this just giant statue. It's got kind of 5 parts to it, and then a rock comes and destroys the entire statue, and the rock becomes a mountain. The statue is utterly turned into dust, right? That's basically the picture that we have. So this was the dream, and now I'm going to interpret it for you, O king. You, O king, are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory, right? So Nebuchadnezzar, you become this huge, powerful king, right? With a huge empire. God has given this to you. In your hands, he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold, right? So in the dream, you're the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar. After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. All right, so Daniel says, these are all kingdoms, right? The different parts of the statue are different kingdoms. Now, we don't have revealed in scripture to us the specific names for each of these kingdoms. So we kind of have to hypothesize a little bit about it. Most scholars will say this is what Daniel's talking about. So you got the gold head, that's Babylon. We know that part. The silver chest then is Persia, which is going to be a kingdom that's going to conquer Babylon. Then Greece. So then you got Alexander the Great showing up. Then you've got Rome. And then you've got whatever comes after Rome, the iron and clay feet. All right. But now, in the time of that last thing, in the time of those kings, the God of, I think it says Israel, will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. So after these 5 kingdoms, then God's going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Okay? It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. So there's going to be a kingdom that's going to be established that endures forever. That's kind of interesting, huh? And that kind of sounds familiar to our ears, maybe. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. So what we can do then is we can kind of take this statue and how it talks about these different kingdoms, and we can kind of see also a little bit of the history of Israel as this history progresses then, a history that Daniel prophesied about, right? So in 587, the Babylonians defeated Jerusalem, their final siege there. Then the Persian Empire shows up. Cyrus conquers Babylon in 539. Then the first group of Israelites return under Zerubbabel, under this new Persian Empire. Then in 430, the last prophecy from Malachi shows up. Then eventually Greece comes onto the scene. Alexander the Great conquers Jerusalem in 332. After Alexander, he dies very young, right? And afterwards, he then divides his kingdom up among his generals. And so Ptolemy and the ancestors of Ptolemy ruled Jerusalem starting in 320. So they're the first rulers, Greek rulers. Then the Seleucids follow up in the 200s. Then eventually Rome is going to conquer Greece. Isn't going to technically conquer Greece over Israel, but they're going to conquer Greece. In 167, there's the Maccabean revolt. So remember us talking about Judas Maccabee, the priest that led the Israelites into revolt. And so there's going to be a small time of independence for the Israelites that are going to be called the Hasmonean kingdom for a short period before Rome comes in and takes over Israel. And then that's basically the intertestamental period for us. All right. So for Israel, there's going to be the Babylonian captivity and Persia, and then the intertestamental period begins with Alexander the Great defeating Israel, and then lots of Greek rulers, a small period of rebellion, and then Rome comes in and takes over. And in this entire time period of Greece and Rome and this revolt that's taking place, there is no prophecy. And the Israelites, the Jewish people themselves say there is no prophecy in this time period. There's no one that says that he is speaking for the Lord throughout it. But at the end of all of this, there is going to be this rock that comes and destroys the statue, right? This rock that is going to undo these human kingdoms that have been established. And of course, the Israelites are going to be thinking about this being a human earthly kingdom that's going to somehow overthrow the other powers that were conquering them. And they look back to Daniel for this kind of reasoning. But we know that that rock has come to create a very different kind of kingdom, right? That rock that is going to come and destroy things. Because in fact, that rock is a humble king, right? It's a humble king that is going to be coming to establish things in a way radically opposed to what the Israelites are expecting.